In this video, we're going to talk about all of the different cell types and tissues and structures that are involved in the immune system. So blood cells are hugely important in surveilling of the body and the function of the immune system. So how blood cells get produced is by a process called hematopoiesis. So all blood cells start from some precursor stem cell and then differentiate into all the different types of blood cells that we have. So it's called the hematopoietic stem cell, and we differentiate into red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Red blood cells and platelets, not really a part of immunology. We don't worry too much about them, and we're going to focus more on the white blood cells. Where does hematopoiesis happen throughout the life, right? So as a embryo in the first 5 weeks, it's going to occur in a yolk sac until the liver starts to develop, and then it will occur in the liver until the bones start to develop in a fetus. Once the bones start to develop, that is where eventually the hematopoiesis will happen throughout the life of a person. Is going to be in the bone marrow. Right, this is hard to see, but hopefully you can see all of these different cells that differentiate. Right, so you start with the hematopoietic stem cell here at the top, and then we form different types of blood cells over here. There is so much to talk about here, but I'm just going to keep it to some basics for intro to microbiology. You would study this more in detail if you took an immunology class. But remember, the red blood cells and the platelets, not really a part of the immune system, so we're not going to talk too much about them. Then we have neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, and mast cells. So these are immune cells with inflammatory function. I will talk about neutrophils and eosinophils. We'll leave basophils and mast cells out of it. And then we also have dendritic cells, macrophages, which we've already talked about macrophages, but I'll go more into detail about them. And then B cells, T cells, and natural killer cells. So there's a lot of complexity to immunology and the immune system and all of these cell types. Tonight, I will in this series of non-specific lectures, we'll discuss neutrophils and eosinophils. I'll talk about some of these macrophages, these other cell types, but dendritic cells and B cells and T cells really have more to do with the specific side of things. All right, so what are the functions? Neutrophils, these are a type of leukocyte. Neutrophils are phagocytizers. So neutrophils are rolling around within your bloodstream, waiting to be pulled to the site of infection. If you watch the Life of a Cell video on YouTube, the cells that were rolling through the bloodstream at the beginning of the video, those are neutrophils. Right? And they are attracted to the tissues where there's an infection happening by chemical signalers, and then they pass into to wherever the inflammatory response is going on. Again, we'll talk more about that later. Eosinophils, the only thing I really want you to know about eosinophils is that their job is to attack and destroy large eukaryotic pathogens. So not everything can be engulfed, right? Microbes can be engulfed and digested, but if you have some sort of like amoeba infection or a worm, one of your cells is not going to be able to, ingest or engulf, phagocytize a multicellular organism. So eosinophils shoot out like exoenzymes and toxins, and they try to attack a larger scale pathogen. Monocytes, they're also called macrophages when they're in the tissues. They're called monocytes when they're in the bloodstream, but macrophages migrate to the site of the tissue, and their job is to phagocytize. So they recognize anything that's foreign, and they engulf it and destroy it. We talked about phagosomes and phagolysosomes, and how that all works in a previous lecture. And they are sometimes also involved in communicating to other immune cells or doing something that's called antigen presentation. And I will get into that later, right? Dendritic cells also are antigen presenting cells. So they help to process debris from the site of infection and prevent what is known as antigen to T cells in order to stimulate them. But that, again, is a part of the specific line of defense, so we won't spend too much time going into that in these series of lectures. I'll do it next time. All right. So lymphocytes are B cells and T cells. Again, a part of the specific immune system, or a third line of defense. So we, again, will talk about that more in the next series of lectures. B cells convey something called humoral immunity by producing antibodies that then go out to the site of infection and do lots of different things, whereas T cells are considered to have cell-mediated immunity, meaning they actually travel to the site of infection and can kill foreign cells. But again, I'm just trying to do an overview of all the different kinds of blood cells that are involved in the immune system in this video, and we'll go into more specifics how they're involved in the second and the third line of defense moving forward. All right, so some other compartments or components, cell tissues, whatever, that are involved in the immune system is the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic vessels are vessels that are spread throughout the body that create a network of connection between wherever the site of infection is and the lymph nodes and other specialized lymphoid tissue. So the function of it is really just to transport cells around in the battle against whatever the invading pathogen is, and also to help drain off any debris as a result of the infection, and to store immune cells when they're not functioning. Right. So here you can see this is the lymphatic vessels on the left-hand side here, right? So you can see that they're spread all over the body and can tend to be concentrated in different places where there is a high risk of exposure to pathogens. So like this gut-associated lymphoid tissue, right? There's lymphoid tissue that's near the gut that, the gut is very exposed in high rates to potential pathogens, right? So it's important that we have specialized immune cells and lymphatic cells in that area, right? Over here, this picture on the right is just kind of showing that there are a concentration of lymph nodes near your armpit, right? And as a female, that is why the lymphatic vessels are connected to your mammary tissue, so that through breastfeeding, you can convey immunity that you've acquired over your lifetime to your child. All right, some other organs, tissues involved in the immune system, in the lymphatic system are lymph nodes, like I've said, the thymus, the spleen, the specialized gut-associated lymphoid tissues, your tonsils, connective tissues between your tissue and the lymphatic system. I guess we kind of talked about that with the reticuloendothelial system too. The lymph nodes are these small little bean-shaped organs, and what their job is to house T and B cells, which are in charge of your third line of defense, the specific line of defense, which we'll talk about next time. The spleen is similar to the lymph nodes, but the other job that it has is it actually filters your blood and filters pathogens from your blood. So your spleen, I always kind of say, is like sort of this toxic waste dump inside of your body. If you ever rupture your spleen or do damage to your spleen, you get in a car wreck, it can be very dangerous, because essentially what happens is it just like leaches pathogens into your body cavity, and you have a really high risk of infection, and it's very difficult to treat. So the spleen is, filtering out a lot of waste and debris and pathogens from your blood and from your tissues. All right, the thymus. The thymus is actually in charge of what is called T cell maturation. It's where your body screens T cells that are formed through hematopoiesis to make sure that they are going to not attack you. And again, we'll talk about T cell maturation more later in the next set of videos, because that is the specific side of things, but just, keep in mind that thymus is important. you tend to have a more active or larger thymus when you're a child because it's very active trying to sort of establish your immune system. Once your immune system is a little bit more established and you get older, your thymus tends to shrink. So there are like bundles of lymphoid tissue all over your body. And again, these are places where there is exposure, a high rate of exposure to the outside world where there's going to be potential pathogens. So gut-associated lymphoid tissue, skin-associated lymphoid tissue, bronchial-associated lymphoid tissue. So just a concentration of lymphatic vessels in places where, they're going to be needed most. All right, in the next video, we'll start to get into the actual steps. Now that we've gone through all of the systems and all of the tissues and players and cell types and vesicles that are involved in the immune system, now we'll try and start to get into the nuts and bolts of what actually happens and how it works in the next series of videos.